Sonic, the heart of your system.
Alright guys, Dominic here for KitGuru, and today we are back with another review. It's of this system here, the Overclockers UK Gaming 16 Essential. So it's obviously a pre-built system, but probably what sets this one apart is the pricing, as it comes in at just £699. Despite that price, the core of the system is the new Nvidia GTX 1660, and we also have the 6-core Ryzen 5 2600 processor. Alongside that, we have 8GB of 2400MHz DDR4 memory, and that is connected to a Gigabyte A320 micro ATX motherboard. Storage comes from a 240GB SSD as well as a 1TB hard drive, and powering the system we have a 500W 80 plus power supply from Kolink, and that is all housed within another Kolink part, the chassis, which is the Kolink Aviator M RGB, another micro ATX case. So if we start things off with a look at the build, first of all, I'm going to have to tell you guys a little story. When I first got this system, I unpacked it, I was just looking around, I took out the foam that came inside the PC to protect it during shipping, and then I wanted to take off the front panel just to see what was under there, kind of what the ventilation was like, that kind of thing. So as I was going to pull off the front panel, basically what I noticed is there's a clear piece, or a kind of semi-transparent acrylic piece on the front panel, which is obviously where the RGB fan is meant to shine through. As I was pulling off the case, for some reason a little piece of plastic on that acrylic snapped off. So we think, in speaking with Overclockers UK, that acrylic section might have come slightly loose. So as I applied a pressure to it as I was pulling off the front panel, the top corner just snapped off. So the reason I'm telling you this is really just because the first thing to note really is when you get to a price like this, £699 for a pre-built system, build quality is never really going to be the best. When you get down, to a PC at this price, it's all very much about bang for buck. So unfortunately, I did run into an issue with this specific Kolink case. That being said, I did get in touch with Overclockers UK and tell them, I said, guys, look, this is what happened. The front panel basically just snapped off when it really shouldn't have. I was just pulling off the front panel. And they said to me actually that with this system they're providing a 3-year collect and return warranty. So even though I guess it was my fault, it potentially could have been exacerbated by shipping. Maybe that acrylic panel came loose. So they told me even if you were just setting up this system, you bought this PC, you were just setting up, going through the whole unboxing process, and something like this happened, they would still have you covered. And it's a 3-year collect and return warranty as well, so you wouldn't even need to arrange for the for it to get sent back to Overclockers UK. They would do that all themselves. So really that is just the first point I wanted to make. At this price, the overall build quality of the case is not great, but that being said, it does give us a chance to talk about Overclockers UK and their 3-year collect and return warranty, which definitely does give me that bit of extra peace of mind when you are buying a system at this price. If we carry on with a tour of the PC and the components though, as we mentioned, the Kolink case, maybe not the best build quality. It does have a clear acrylic side panel though. I've already removed that just for reflections, while the other side panel is made of solid steel. Once we get inside, I think the first thing you really notice is that Overclockers UK hasn't really done anything exceptional with the build. It all looks, I guess, fairly as expected. So if we start with the CPU, that means we have the Ryzen 5 2600, and this is using the stock Wraith stealth cooler. It's probably not the best thing. We're going to look at thermals later on, but obviously it does come in the box with that processor, so it is saving, that 20-30 quid you would have spent on a third-party air cooler. Now, it's also worth noting on the topic of the CPU that this is running at stock clocks. It's a base clock of 3.4 GHz, as the motherboard is an A320M chipset that doesn't actually allow for any overclocking, so everything is running at stock in terms of the CPU. Next to that we find our memory, and in this system we have two 4GB DDR4 memory modules. These are each running at 2400MHz. So these days, I would say in a mid-range system and up, you really would expect to have 16GB of system RAM in the whole PC. But as this is a budget build, obviously Overclockers UK is trying to cut costs in pretty much every department that they can. So I think 8GB is still a decent capacity. It will get you by. Obviously the step up to 16 is probably going to be an extra £30 or £40 or so. So obviously that does just raise the price bracket a bit higher for the system. As for the rest of the build, it's worth looking at the cooling. So there's two fans in this system. There's a 120mm intake at the front, and then there's also a 120mm exhaust at the back. These are both actually RGB fans as well, so you can control them using a little button on the front I/O, so just on the top panel, and you can choose between static, breathing, and then color cycling. So it is quite basic, but in a system that costs this much, it is definitely better than nothing. As for our graphics card, this is the newly released GTX 1660, and specifically this is the Gigabyte OC6G model. Now, I've not actually reviewed this specific 1660 OC6G, but I have looked at the 1660 Ti OC6G, and as far as I can tell, it's exactly the same card used here. So what that tells us is it's not going to be the absolute fastest or the absolute quietest 1660 going, but it is still a very capable dual fan card, and it's really all about bang for buck because it does come in at that £199 MSRP, and you know, bang for buck really does sum up the system as a whole. Now, our storage drives are also worth touching on. These are placed in the drive cage in the kind of front corner of the system. We've got a 240GB A400 SATA SSD from Kingston, so that is for Windows, and I suppose you could probably fit maybe 2 or 3 games on that as well. But then there's also a 1TB Seagate Barracuda, which is obviously going to be for the rest of your game library and any additional media. So at this price, I think overall it is a pretty balanced storage solution. Coming on to the power supply though, this is a 500 watt unit from Kolink, and it is 80 plus certified. They call it 80 plus white because it's just got a little white sticker, but that is essentially the tier below 80 plus bronze. So the first thing that jumped out of me was no 80 plus bronze certification. It's definitely a cheap power supply. It actually retails on its own for just £35. So I immediately thought it really should be 80 plus bronze. In this day and age, we'd have to say, even for a budget system, 80 plus bronze does have to be the bare minimum. So what we did was we reached out to Overclockers UK and we said, look guys, we're just not too sure about the power supply you've gone for. Obviously we know that power supply is probably going to be one of the first things you would cut back on when you're trying to hit a specific budget, but that being said, it is still a very crucial element to the whole system. You know, if this power supply goes, you know, a year or two down the line, it could take the motherboard and the graphics card with it. So, you know, we want to know that this is actually going to be a decent unit. So, like we said, we've not reviewed it, so we still couldn't tell you exactly just how good it actually is. But what we can tell you, and you know, to their credit, Overclockers were actually very transparent about this. They actually disclosed to us their RMA numbers for this specific model. So they told us of the several thousand that they had sold for the power supply standalone, it had an RMA rate of 1.48%. So essentially what that means to me is you are probably very unlikely, even if you buy a cheap power supply like this, based on the RMA rate from Overclockers UK, you are actually going to be quite unlikely to run into any issues with it. Even if you do run into any issues though, and I guess it still could happen, you still have that 3-year collect and return warranty as well. So any issues with the system within that 3 years, just get onto Overclockers and they will be able to pick up the PC, ship it back to their base, fix it or replace any parts and ship it back to you. Still on the topic of the PSU though, I do think OC UK could have done a better job with cable management. It's actually a non-modular power supply, so that definitely doesn't help, and then also the ketchup and mustard cables are really ugly. But even then, there are still some cables bunched up kind of under the graphics card, and even around the back of the system as well. Obviously, the fact that it's a non-modular power supply is causing issues. All the cables are kind of bunched up behind the storage drive, so when I actually took the other side panel off for the first time, it was a bit of a struggle getting it back on. I fully appreciate at this price point that the kind of aesthetics is probably going to be the absolute lowest priority, but if Overclockers UK just spent a little bit of extra time just to get the cables a bit neater, maybe around the back they wouldn't be quite so bunched up, I think that definitely would have helped. If we move on to our performance testing now, as we mentioned, the core of the system is the GTX 1660 and the Ryzen 5 2600, which is running at stock clock. So that is essentially where the bulk of our gaming performance is going to come from. If we just touch on the CPU first though, we still saw an impressive score of 1240 in Cinebench, despite the fact that is running stock. and if we look at our 3D mark testing as well, both the physics and the CPU results are again very impressive. Anyone buying this system though is likely to be purely interested in the game performance, and here this is actually where the system really shines, especially at 1080p, which in my opinion is what the GTX 1660 is best at. That's because across all of the games we tested, this system averaged at least 60 FPS at 1080p, and in many cases it went higher. In Far Cry 5, for instance, the system was averaging 80 FPS at 1080p, and even in Apex Legends, and you can probably expect similar things for other, easier to run esports titles, even there we were seeing over 100 FPS on average. You could probably also tell that this system can just about get away with some 1440p gaming as well, depending on the title, although that being said, the frame rates are a fair bit lower and some do get a bit choppy, so for me, I would stick to 1080p. On that note as well, I also do think anyone who's buying this £699 system is unlikely to be pairing it with a more expensive 1440p monitor in the first place. But overall, in a nutshell, the Overclockers UK Gaming 16 Essential, I think, is simply a very competent 1080p gaming machine. Thermal performance is also pretty decent for a system like this, especially considering there's actually only 2 case fans and there's not too much in the way of ventilation at the front. Even in that situation though, the CPU ran no hotter than 85 degrees, and that was when we looped Cinebench multiple times. If you're just gaming on this PC though, we didn't actually see the CPU run hotter than 58 degrees. That was when playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider. When the CPU is stressed across all cores as well, it ran at an average speed of 3.6 GHz, which is about 200 MHz faster than the 3.4 GHz base clock. Our graphics card also ran fairly cool as well, peaking no hotter than 71 degrees again while playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and that was with the core clock averaging just over 1900 MHz, which is another good result for a GTX 1660. Now, as for noise levels, I would say this isn't really a concern either. The system isn't dead silent at idle. You can still hear the fan spinning, I guess because there isn't too much in the way of ventilation. Even at idle, the case does need to get some fresh air in. But under load, it only ran about 5 decibels louder than when it was idling, and I have to say, overall I have heard much louder systems in the past, so you will be able to hear the fan spinning when you're gaming, but overall the noise is very, very tolerable and it is really not that annoying at all. Lastly, we come on to power draw, and again it is very low, with the whole system pulling just 205 watts from the wall. That means this 500 watt power supply is barely running at 40% load, which despite the fact it's only a 80 plus white certified power supply, means it is going to be operating at high levels of efficiency and it's really not going to be stressed at all. So then, if we wrap up this video now, I think the first thing is, and I think probably what a number of you have probably been thinking throughout this video is, it's very easy to look at a system like this and look at little things and say, oh, if only they'd done this, if only they'd gone for 16 gigs of RAM, if only the RAM was slightly faster, if only they'd gone with a better case, a faster graphics card, or a better air cooler, whatever it might be. It's very easy to look at a system like this and just point out little things and say, oh, it'd only be an extra £10 for this or an extra £20 for that. The problem with that is, by the time you go through and make all those changes, a PC which would start out at £699, ends up costing hundreds of pounds more. So we really do have to look at this in the with the view that this is very much a budget gaming PC, and compromises are and have been made to reach that £699 price point. Overall, for £699, I actually think Overclockers UK has done a really good job. I even went over to PC Part Picker and spec'd up as close to a system like this as I could, just to see how much it would cost to build yourself using these components, and I actually came to just about £650 including Windows. So really, Overclockers UK isn't charging much of a premium at all, and you have to remember that the £699 price also includes that 3-year collect and return warranty. Like we already mentioned though, it is not going to be perfect for £699. The case does feel a little bit on the cheap side. I did have that issue with the front panel snapping, and then we also had a bit of a question mark about this 80 plus white certified power supply. Even so, GTX 1660 and the Ryzen 5 2600 are very much the stars of the show, and what this PC is all about is the 1080p gaming, and that's where those components really shine. So in a nutshell, actually, that is what this whole system is about. Sacrifices obviously had to be made to reach the $699 price point, but if you just want a system that is going to be able to game at 1080p and game really well, we saw frame rates going up to and beyond 100 FPS depending on the game, then in that regard, the Overclockers UK Gaming 16 Essential is actually a very capable system. So I'm Dominic 4Kit Guru. If you enjoyed this video, you can leave us a thumbs up. Also leave a comment down below. Let me know, guys, what you think about this system. Bear in mind, it is a £699 system, so it's really nothing high-end, nothing fancy, but do let me know down below what you think. Would you change anything? Try and keep it within reason though, as it is very much a budget build. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. You can also hit that notification bell, and that way you'll just get notified whenever a new video or a new review goes up. Until then though, I'm Dominic 4Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.